The turmoil of World War II entered its 27th month. Japanese troops stormed Shanghai. German armies stood at the gates of Moscow, leaving 6.5 million casualties in their wake. Nazi Germany had mainland Europe in its grip. Under siege, Britain hung on by a thread. 3,000 miles away, 76% of its United States remained at peace. Citizens supported neutrality. At 7:55 a.m. on December 7, 1941, 360 Japanese warplanes descended on Pearl Harbor. World War II had come to America. This was a war fought on a global scale, a conflict seen here from a unique vantage point. The unprovoked attack sent shock waves across the globe. Though America had feared a strike for months, Japan's imperial ambitions had grown bolder and bolder, first with the invasion of Manchuria, then China itself. When France fell to Nazi Germany in 1940, Japan seized control of French Indochina. The US response was rapid and severe. Japan's financial assets were frozen, and a crippling oil embargo was imposed. Faced with this economic pressure, Japan was left with two choices: stop its territorial expansion and give in to allied demands, or go to war. Japan chose war. In the words of Prime Minister Churchill, it is either glory or decline. Their strategy hinged on a decisive first strike. Japanese military planners knew they could never defeat the United States in a long, drawn-out naval war. Their only hope was to administer a knockout blow to the capital ships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. If they could destroy the fleet, the American ability to respond in the Pacific would be taken away for many months. Yet, within this overwhelming tactical victory, Japan's margin of victory hid to fatal strategic flaws. First, the Japanese failed to systematically attack the massive oil storage tanks at Pearl Harbor. Had they spent one more sortie destroying those tanks, they would have crippled the entire Pacific Fleet, which would have been left without the fuel supplies to operate. More significant were the ships the Japanese failed to target entirely: the American aircraft carriers. Absent from the harbor that day, these carriers would quickly become the most significant naval asset in the Pacific War. Japan had failed to damage the two factors that would ultimately dictate the fate of the war: oil supplies and air domination. Instead of delivering a lasting defeat, Japan awakened the full wrath of a sleeping giant. As one historian noted, Pearl Harbor infuriated the American people and also infuriated the American military. The massive casualties and destruction unified a country that had been deeply divided about the war. No longer was President Roosevelt limited in his options. He had a United States population that was angry, unified, and desired revenge against Japan. America's era of isolationism was over. The nation was now at war and began its monumental rise to become the most powerful nation on the planet. What American intelligence could not see was the approach of Admiral Yamamoto's fleet, which departed Japan on the longest naval assault in history, avoiding all shipping lanes and land masses. They arrived and seen just 275 miles from their target. It was the perfect vantage point, beyond the range of America's defensive radar, but at the optimum strike distance for its force of 414 cutting-edge aircraft. The jewel in their crown was the Mitsubishi Zero, a fighter plane that was faster, more maneuverable, and had a longer range than anything the Americans had encountered. But beyond the technology, what mattered were the pilots. They were well-trained, battle-hardened crews who had been planning the attack for a long period of time, running war games and simulations until they could have done it blind. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave of bombers swooped from the sky. On the deck of the USS Arizona was Seaman Don Stratton, who recalled the immediate horror. "I knew right away that they were Japanese planes," he said. "We knew that they were bombing Fort Island and something was radically wrong. Planes were strafing and dive bombing. It was just a horrible experience and a horrible sight. A bomb from a high-altitude bomber," he described, "just devastated everything in its path. The concussion and the smoke and the fire was horrendous. It just was like you'd lost your home." In just 68 minutes, Japan crippled the heart of America's Pacific Fleet. Of the 8 battleships at anchor, the Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, and California were sunk. The rest were severely damaged. the Japanese lost only 60 for men to America's 3,649 casualties, a staggering human damage ratio of 57 to 1. From the Japanese perspective, the attack succeeded beyond their most optimistic expectations. This required an unprecedented national effort. The government calculated the war would cost $300 billion, a sum that would be 4.4 trillion in today's money, over 1.5 times the entire US federal budget at the time. To raise these vast funds, the government turned to the public in a massive war bond drive. The goal was to get half the population of the United States to buy bonds. The message was clear: this was a fight of good versus evil, and every individual would make a difference. To guarantee success, the administration recruited the most potent propaganda asset it had: the Hollywood machine. Over 300 movie icons joined the Stars Over America campaign, crisscrossing the nation and rallying citizens to contribute. These bond campaigns would ultimately raise $187.5 billion, a testament to a nation fully aligned behind a single goal. America and its beleaguered allies would need every cent. Just 4 days after Pearl Harbor, Nazi Germany declared war on the United States. America now faced two vast and battle-hardened powers onto separate fronts across the globe. Seen from above, America's peril was clear. Her fleet was in disarray in the Pacific, and her strongest military ally, Great Britain, was buckling under siege from Nazi Germany. America was at the epicenter of the greatest conflict in history. President Roosevelt now had to make the biggest call of any US presidency: which enemy to engage first. He decided that Germany was the primary threat. It was the power that could take down America's closest friends. Keeping Britain afloat was essential to the long-term prospects of victory. It stood as a large, unsinkable aircraft carrier that would enable a future invasion of the European continent. If Britain fell under Nazi domination, the challenge would be almost insurmountable. The road ahead would be long and bloody, fought in the air, on the ground, and on the sea across multiple continents. The unity of the Allied nations, under the banner of the United Nations, would be highlighted regularly in the newsreels that documented the struggle. The home front would focus on military training, civilian war production, women entering the workforce in record numbers, and the relentless bond drives. All major fighting fronts would be covered, from the sands of North Africa to the islands of the Pacific, all leading to the final, hard-won victory.